Welcome back. This is the third in our screencast series on secondary materials. In this edition, we will discuss restatements. This will be our only discussion of restatements, not because restatements are not important, they are very important, but because they're pretty straightforward and this should be all that we need. So let's dive in. As you may remember from your first year contracts and torts classes, restatements are drafted by very respected scholars and practitioners in their particular field, and what they are basic statements of the law in that field. As a result, because these are drafted by such prominent practitioners and scholars, restatements can be very strong persuasive authority for the basic statements that they make. So, as a result, restatements are going to be really good to use, especially when you need support for a basic point of law. So, for example, if you needed support for the concept that a valid contract requires consideration, the restatement of contracts would be a great source to check. The process of creating a statement is a very well-considered, involved one that involves committees and debates and various drafts. You really don't need to worry about what these drafts are or how to find them, with the one very rare exception that if you need to find out why language was or was not adopted for a particular section, or you need some kind of background to that section of a particular restatement, then these drafts will be necessary. But for most of the time, if ever, you will really not need to worry about these drafts. So what will you see in a restatement? And this is something that you want to understand. Essentially, a particular restatement section will include a statement of a general principle of law. This is going to be a very brief and basic statement. After that basic statement, then you will see an explanatory comment or two, and each of those comments will give you one or more hypothetical illustration that's supposed to apply real-life situations to show you how that comment applies to the general statement. And then after that, you will see reporter's notes, which is going to give you some background information on what the drafters considered when they drafted the language of that section. It will give you citations to cases that support the language of that section, as well as possible citations to statutes or other secondary sources. And then you will see citations to cases that cite to that particular restatement section. So let's take a look and see what a restatement section actually looks like. So going to Westlaw, here we see Section 71 of the Restatement of Contracts, and Section 71 is part of the Formation of Contracts Consideration chapter. And what we see here is, as I said, that very basic general statement, only a few lines long. And then after that, we see the comment, so additional detail and further explanation of that general statement. So what are other meanings of consideration? And then we see illustrations of that comment, so some hypothetical or slightly more real-world examples of those comments and more illustrations. And then we see the reporter's note. So what is the background to how Section 71 came to be? So that is the content of a particular section of a restatement. You also want to understand the overall format for a particular overall restatement, the Restatement of Contracts, for example. So each restatement is divided into chapters that looks at a major aspect of that particular field. Then each of those chapters will be subdivided into particular topics, and each of those topics then subdivided again into particular numbered sections. So let's take a look again back at the restatement and back here on Westlaw. here is the table of contents for the restatement of the law of contracts. And as we can see, we see the chapters. So we see the various chapters of the major aspects of contracts. So we see here chapter 4 talks about consideration. And then within chapter 4, we have various topics. So you see the various areas within the idea of consideration. And then within each topic, you see this section. And there is our section 71. So now you see the structure of restatements. How would you find restatements? Pretty much these days, the easiest way is to go online. Restatements are not available for free on the web, so you can't Google them, but you can find them on Lexis, Westlaw, or Bloomberg. So let's take a look and see how we do that. So going here to Westlaw, we've already seen what a restatement looks like. How do you find it? Pretty much the same way you would find any kind of known title or resource on Westlaw, and that you can do so by typing it in the title in the search bar here. So typing in restatement singular and then contracts will show us how to find the restatement of contracts. Another way to find restatements on Westlaw, which has some advantages, is to browse at the menu. So clicking on secondary sources, I see here by type, I can go to restatements, and Westlaw will pull up all of the restatements that it has available. We can see that narrowed here by publication type. The advantage of doing this is this allows me to search all of the restatements. So if I'm not sure exactly which restatement my issue might appear in, then this would be a way to search all of the restatements. A good example of that actually is our client's issue regarding finding an HMO liable. I'm not sure which restatement that would be in, so I could try searching for liability of HMO throughout all of the restatements. I can also find particular restatements this way as well. Scrolling down, we can see we can find the restatement of contracts. Of course, I want to choose the most recent, and at this point, we see again the table of contents. I could search the entire restatement, or I could choose particular chapters to search. Going back here to our section 71 on Westlaw, we see here we've scrolled down to reporter's notes. As I mentioned, the one difference between the different services is how the case citations for a particular section, or really to a particular section, appear. Here on Westlaw, you scroll down to the bottom and you find the case citations by jurisdiction. So let's take a look at the restatement on Lexis. How do we find restatements? Pretty much the same way as we did on Westlaw. We can type in the title in our search bar here, and you notice that Lexis will pull up our restatement, so we could choose contracts here. Again, we can also browse. So again, going to secondary materials and choosing content type, and we find the restatements under there. And going this way again has the same advantage of allowing us to search all of the restatements if we're not sure to which one we want to narrow our search. Taking a look at the a particular restatement and what it looks like on Lexis is pretty much the same as we saw on Westlaw. So going to the restatement of contracts, and expanding out, we see the chapters, and within each chapters we can see the topic, and then within each topic we again will see our sections. It looks pretty much the same. We have our basic statement, we have our comments and the illustrations to those comments, and as we scroll through there we see our reporter's notes, as we mentioned. The main difference on Lexis is where those citations to cases that cite to Section 71 appear. On Lexis, you will see them here in the Citators link as well as the Shepherdized link. And last and arguably least is Bloomberg. Restatements are a little trickier to find on Bloomberg. Really, the best way only is to type it in the search bar here, and you can see that contracts comes up as we do that. And you see the table of contents. Bloomberg is different than either Lexis or Westlaw in how it shows us citations to cases that cite to a particular restatement section. Bloomberg does it the same way that the print volumes do, and that is to give appendices for different time periods that report cases. Taking a quick look now at what the restatement looks like on Bloomberg. If we go here again to our section on, or our chapter on consideration, we see our topic, the requirements, and we can see here what section 71 looks like. And again, looks pretty much the same, our basic statement, then our comments and illustrations to those comments, and then finally, as we scroll down after the comments and illustrations, we see the reporter's notes. Okay, so that is all there is for restatements. As promised, I hope you found that pretty straightforward. And with that, we will wrap up our secondary sources screencasts. I want to highlight again that secondary sources, I hope I have convinced you that secondary sources are worth checking. Again, as I've mentioned, I hear from law firm librarians and read a lot that one big concern with new attorneys is that they want to dive into cases right away, or they cite to a particular case that only has their search terms but doesn't give the overall context for an issue or reflect the complexity of an issue. If you want to see that point of view for yourself, I highly recommend this article, What Do Legal Employers Want to See in New Graduates? And you can look particularly at pages cited here for the discussion on legal research. Again, remember to answer the restatement screencast questions in our course website on Lexis Classroom. That's all, folks.